Mark's day started like any other. As the owner of a small logistics business, his warehouse was the hub for everything he had worked so hard to build. The facility, tucked away on the edge of a suburban neighborhood, was his pride and joy. Its spacious parking lot provided ample room for delivery trucks, employees' vehicles, and his own personal car. It was the perfect setup, or so he thought, until he pulled into the lot that morning. The first sign that something was amiss was the row of unfamiliar cars. Mark slowed his vehicle as he entered the lot, taking in the sight of sedans, SUVs, and even a minivan parked haphazardly in spaces clearly marked private property. At first he thought it must be a mistake. Perhaps there had been an event nearby, or someone had used his lot temporarily in an emergency. But as he drove further, the situation became impossible to ignore. Every single space was occupied, leaving no room for his staff or deliveries. A delivery truck idled awkwardly at the entrance, unable to proceed. Mark's frustration grew as he parked his car on the curb and stepped out to investigate. He walked through the lot, inspecting the vehicles. None of them bore any signs indicating they were connected to his business. A few had stickers from the nearby residential community, a development managed by a homeowner association he had sparingly interacted with. The warehouse, though close to the neighborhood, was completely independent of it. He had deliberately chosen this location for its separation from residential distractions. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, Karen, who was already inside the warehouse. "Karen, did someone authorize parking in our lot for an event or something?" he asked, his tone sharp. "No, Mark," Karen replied. "I was wondering the same thing. A few of the guys already called to complain about not finding spaces. We've got deliveries coming in today. What do you want to do?" Mark sighed heavily. "Let me figure this out. I'll call you back." After hanging up, Mark decided to check with the homeowner association office. It wasn't far, just a short walk into the neighborhood. As he approached the homeowner association's community center, he couldn't help but notice how pristine everything looked: flower beds meticulously maintained, freshly painted fences, and well-paved roads. The homeowner association clearly had the funds to keep things in top shape. Inside, he was greeted by a receptionist who smiled politely, seemingly unaware of the chaos her organization had unleashed. "I need to speak to someone in charge," Mark said curtly. "There is an issue with my warehouse parking lot." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, sir. Let me see if Miss Langston, our homeowner association president, is available." A few minutes later, Mark found himself sitting across from Miss Langston, a poised woman in her late 40s with an air of authority. She listened as Mark explained the situation, though her expression remained impassive. "I'm sorry to hear about the inconvenience," she said finally, "but we had to find a solution for our residents. Parking in the community is limited, and your lot was sitting unused most of the time. We decided it would be a good overflow option." Mark stared at her, incredulous. "You decided? Without asking me? That's private property. You can't just tell people they can park there." Miss Langston's tone hardened. "The homeowner association has the authority to make decisions for the community's benefit. Your lot is adjacent to our neighborhood, and it seemed like a logical choice." Mark's frustration turned to anger. "Logical choice? This is trespassing. My business relies on that lot. Trucks can't even get in right now because of the cars your residents left there. You didn't even ask me." Miss Langston waved a hand dismissively. "We assumed you wouldn't mind since it wasn't being fully utilized." Mark leaned forward, his voice firm. "I do mind. I'm giving you 48 hours to notify your residents and clear the lot. After that, I'll take action." The homeowner association president's expression darkened. "Mr. Cruz, I suggest you think carefully before escalating this. The homeowner association has resources, and we're acting within our rights." Mark stood up, his fists clenched. "You're not within your rights, and I'll prove it." The meeting ended on a tense note, with Mark storming out of the community center. He felt a mix of disbelief and fury. How could the homeowner association justify such blatant overreach? He returned to his warehouse, where Karen and the rest of the staff were waiting for an update. "They're claiming they have the authority to use our lot," Mark explained, his voice still heated. "But they don't. I'm giving them 48 hours to fix this, and if they don't, we're towing every single car." Karen nodded. "Good. This is ridiculous." Over the next 2 days, Mark watched as the cars continued to fill his lot. He saw residents casually coming and going, some even waving to him as if nothing was wrong. It was infuriating. Despite his warnings, it was clear the homeowner association had no intention of complying. On the second evening, Mark noticed even more cars than before, some of them parked so carelessly they blocked access to his warehouse doors. It was the final straw. Mark pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. He wanted to make sure every step he took would be airtight legally. After discussing his options, he decided to post signs around the lot and prepare to tow the vehicles. The signs, printed in bold letters, read "No parking. Private property. Violators will be towed at owner's expense." Mark installed the signs himself, placing them at every entrance to the lot. He took photos of the signs in place, ensuring he had evidence in case the homeowner association tried to dispute his actions. That night, he slept restlessly, knowing the next day would be pivotal. As he prepared for the confrontation ahead, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about parking. It was about standing up to an organization that thought it could trample over his rights. And Mark was determined to prove them wrong. Mark woke up early the following morning, still fuming over his meeting with Miss Langston and the audacity of the homeowner association's actions. The anger in his chest had not subsided, but it was now coupled with a firm resolve to take action. As the sun rose over his warehouse, Mark walked the lot once more, taking note of every vehicle parked there. It was like a slap in the face, dozens of cars taking up spaces meant for his employees and delivery trucks, all while the homeowner association showed no sign of relenting. Mark knew he had to try one last time to resolve the matter amicably before escalating things. He didn't want to come across as unreasonable, but he also wasn't going to let the homeowner association get away with their blatant disregard for his property rights. He decided to call Miss Langston directly. If the homeowner association had any intention of resolving this, now was their chance. Dialing the number from the business card she had handed him during their tense meeting, Mark tapped his foot impatiently as the phone rang. When she answered, her tone was as clipped and formal as it had been in person. "Miss Langston, it's Mark Cruz," he began, keeping his voice steady. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation. The cars are still in my lot, and I haven't seen any effort on your part to notify your residents. I'd like to resolve this without involving lawyers or tow trucks, but I need you to act now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she replied, her tone laced with irritation. "Mr. Cruz, as I explained, the homeowner association has a responsibility to its residents. Parking in your lot is a temporary solution to a long-standing issue. We've notified the residents about using the space, and we believe this arrangement benefits everyone." Mark clenched his jaw, his patience wearing thin. "You believe it benefits everyone? What about my business? My employees? My delivery trucks that can't even access the loading dock because your residents have taken over? This isn't a negotiation, Miss Langston. This is trespassing." Her response was sharp. "Mr. Cruz, I would urge you to reconsider your tone. The homeowner association is within its rights to manage the community's needs and your parking lot." Mark interrupted her, his voice rising. "My parking lot is private property. You are not within your rights, and if you don't remove those cars immediately, I'll take the necessary steps to enforce my property rights." With that, he hung up, not giving her the chance to respond. His heart pounded as he stared at his phone, frustration bubbling to the surface. He had given the homeowner association every opportunity to make this right, but their arrogance and refusal to cooperate left him no choice. Mark spent the rest of the morning documenting everything. He took photos of the cars, ensuring license plates were clearly visible, and recorded a video showing the extent of the problem. He also captured footage of the posted no parking signs, which had been ignored by the residents. His lawyer had advised him to gather as much evidence as possible to protect himself from any potential backlash. Mark wasn't taking any chances. As he walked the lot, a few residents approached him, seemingly unaware of the brewing storm. One woman, likely in her 30s, waved at him cheerfully as she loaded groceries into her car. "Good morning," she called out. Mark forced a polite nod but didn't respond. The woman's casual demeanor only added to his frustration. How could these people not see the problem? How could they treat his property like an extension of their community, with no regard for the inconvenience they were causing. By noon, Mark had had enough. He called a towing company and explained the situation, making sure they understood the legalities involved. The company assured him they had handled similar cases before and would follow all proper procedures. They agreed to dispatch trucks the following morning. With the towing plan in motion, Mark turned his attention to preparing his employees for what was to come. He gathered everyone in the warehouse break room, where a few of them were already venting their frustrations about the parking lot situation. "This ends tomorrow," Mark announced firmly, addressing the group. "I've given the homeowner association more than enough time to fix this, and they've done nothing. I've hired a towing company to clear the lot. By this time tomorrow, we'll have our spaces back." The employees exchanged relieved glances, and a few even clapped. Karen, his assistant, nodded in approval. "Good. This has gone on long enough. You've been more patient than most people would have been." Mark felt a small sense of validation from their support, but the situation still weighed heavily on him. He hated the idea of confrontation, but the homeowner association had left him no other option. He spent the rest of the day finalizing the details with the towing company and reviewing the legal documents his lawyer had provided. Everything was in place. That evening, Mark returned to the warehouse parking lot one last time to ensure everything was ready for the morning. As he walked among the cars, he noticed new ones had been added since the afternoon. One particularly large SUV was parked so poorly that it took up 2 spaces, further blocking access to the loading dock. It was the ultimate insult, a blatant disregard for his property and his business. The thought of those cars being towed away brought him a small sense of satisfaction. But even as he prepared for the next day's events, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. He knew the residents would be angry, and the situation would likely escalate further. Still, Mark reminded himself that he was in the right. He had followed every legal step, given ample warnings, and documented everything. The homeowner association had ignored his requests and left him no choice. As the sun set, Mark stood at the edge of the lot, watching the cars as if they were symbols of the larger battle he was about to face. He took a deep breath and turned toward the warehouse, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. The morning of the towing operation began early for Mark. He arrived at the warehouse before sunrise, feeling a mix of apprehension and determination. The parking lot was as packed as ever, the sea of vehicles representing the blatant disregard for his property rights. Today, however, would mark the end of the homeowner association's overreach. The towing company arrived promptly at 7 a.m., as promised. The lead driver, a stocky man named Dave, greeted Mark with a firm handshake. "You weren't kidding about this being a mess," Dave said, gesturing toward the crowded lot. "We've got a team of 4 trucks ready to go. You've got the documentation handy?" Mark handed over a folder containing all the necessary paperwork, the property deed, photos of the posted no parking signs, and the certified letter he had sent to the homeowner association. Dave reviewed the documents quickly, nodding in approval. "Looks solid. We'll start with the cars blocking your warehouse doors and work our way out." Mark watched as the towing crew got to work. The sound of engines starting and chains clanking filled the air as one car after another was lifted onto the tow trucks. It was a surprisingly efficient process, and within the first hour, half a dozen vehicles had already been removed. Each time a car was towed, Dave meticulously documented the process, snapping photos of the vehicle's position and the surrounding signage. Mark appreciated the attention to detail. He wanted no room for the homeowner association to claim this had been done improperly. As the sun rose higher, the neighborhood began to stir. Residents started emerging from their homes, some walking their dogs or heading to work. It didn't take long for them to notice the tow trucks. A woman in a bathrobe, clutching a mug of coffee, was the first to approach. Her face twisted in confusion as she stared at the empty spaces where cars had been. "What's going on here?" she demanded, marching up to Mark. "This is private property," Mark replied calmly. "The homeowner association had no right to tell residents they could park here. I've given plenty of warnings, and now I'm enforcing my rights." Her face reddened with anger. "My husband's car is gone. He needs it to get to work. You can't just tow people like this." Mark held his ground. "I gave the homeowner association 2 days to resolve this. They chose to ignore me. If you want to get your car back, you'll need to contact the towing company." The woman huffed, muttering something under her breath as she stormed away. Within minutes, more residents began arriving, some in pajamas, others dressed for the day ahead. The scene quickly turned chaotic as people realized their cars were missing. Voices were raised, accusations were hurled, and a small crowd formed near the lot's entrance. Mark remained calm, knowing he had prepared for this. He had even printed flyers with the towing company's contact information and details about how to retrieve vehicles. Karen arrived around 8 a.m., and he asked her to help hand out the flyers to residents. "Don't engage with them," Mark warned her. "Just give them the information they need and walk away." Despite the escalating tension, the towing operation continued. By mid-morning, nearly all the unauthorized vehicles had been removed, leaving the lot finally clear. Mark felt a wave of relief as he saw the empty spaces, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past week. Delivery trucks could now access the loading dock, and his employees could park without issue. It was a victory, but one that came at a cost. Just as Mark began to think the worst was over, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the lot. Miss Langston, the Homeowner Association president, marched toward him with a determined stride, flanked by two other board members. Her expression was a mixture of outrage and indignation. "Mr. Cruz," she called out, her voice sharp, "what is the meaning of this? You had no right to tow our residents' vehicles." Mark turned to face her, his own expression resolute. "I had every right. This is private property, and I've made it clear from the beginning that your residents were trespassing. I gave you 2 days to resolve this, and you did nothing." Miss Langston's cheeks flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable. You're going to regret this. The Homeowner Association has resources, and we will take legal action if necessary." Mark crossed his arms. "Go ahead. I've documented everything. I've followed the law to the letter. If anyone is in the wrong here, it's the Homeowner Association for misleading your residents and ignoring my warnings." One of the board members stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation. "Let's not escalate this further," he said, glancing nervously between Mark and Miss Langston. "Surely we can come to some sort of arrangement." "There's no arrangement to be made," Mark replied firmly. "The lot is off limits to your residents, effective immediately. If I see another car here, it'll be towed. End of discussion." Miss Langston opened her mouth to argue, but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, she turned on her heel and marched back toward the neighborhood, her entourage following closely behind. As the day went on, the chaos gradually subsided. Residents trickled away, some muttering angrily, others resigned to the situation. Mark felt a sense of vindication but also a lingering unease. He knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. The Homeowner Association would likely retaliate in some way. But for now, he was content knowing he had stood his ground and reclaimed what was rightfully his. By late afternoon, the warehouse lot was back to normal. Employees parked without issue, deliveries were made on time, and the business hummed along as it should. Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how he had handled the situation. He had faced down an overreaching homeowner association and won, proving that standing up for what's right was always worth it. As he locked up the warehouse that evening, Mark took one last look at the empty lot. It was a small victory, but it felt like a significant one. Whatever the homeowner association threw at him next, he would be ready. The day after the towing incident was calm on the surface, but Mark knew better than to assume the battle was over. The empty parking lot at his warehouse felt like a small island of peace amidst the brewing storm. While his employees and deliveries were operating smoothly again, Mark couldn't ignore the subtle tension lingering in the air. The homeowner association's audacity to use his property without consent had already tested his patience, but he suspected their retaliation was only just beginning. Mark's suspicions were confirmed later that afternoon when Karen walked into his office holding an envelope. "This came for you," she said, placing it on his desk. Her tone carried a hint of unease. Mark opened the envelope and scanned the contents. It was a formal letter from the Homeowner Association, signed by none other than Miss Langston. The letter accused Mark of causing undue hardship to the community and claimed that his actions had disrupted the lives of multiple residents. It threatened legal action, demanding that he cease towing vehicles and enter into negotiations to reintegrate his lot as part of the community's parking solution. Mark let out a frustrated sigh, placing the letter on his desk. He couldn't decide whether to laugh at the homeowner association's sheer nerve or feel infuriated by their ongoing overreach. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, who had been advising him throughout the ordeal. "Jacobs, I just got a letter from the homeowner association," Mark began, reading through the letter's key points. "They're threatening to sue me for towing the cars." Jacobs chuckled dryly on the other end. "That's typical homeowner association behavior, bluster and intimidation. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. You documented everything, right?" "Every step," Mark confirmed. "Photos, videos, the certified letter. I even posted the no parking signs before towing. They're just trying to scare me." "Exactly," Jacob said. "Let me draft a response. We'll make it clear that you're within your rights and that any legal action on their part would be baseless. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. If they try anything else, we'll be ready." Mark hung up, feeling reassured but still wary. He had expected resistance from the homeowner association, but their persistence was exhausting. He spent the rest of the day focused on his business, trying to push the situation to the back of his mind. Yet, as the hours passed, his phone buzzed with messages from frustrated residents and even a few veiled threats from anonymous numbers. It was clear that some people were taking the homeowner association's side. By evening, Mark decided to address the situation head-on. He logged onto the homeowner association's community forum, a platform the residents used to communicate, and posted a clear statement. In it, he explained the events leading up to the towing, emphasizing that he had given the homeowner association ample notice and had acted entirely within his legal rights. He included photos of the posted signs and the letters he had sent to Miss Langston, leaving no room for doubt about his actions. The post garnered immediate attention. Within minutes, comments began flooding in. Some residents expressed outrage, accusing Mark of being selfish and unwilling to support the community. Others, however, voiced their agreement, criticizing the homeowner association for overstepping its boundaries and creating the problem in the first place. The debate raged on, with tempers flaring on both sides. One comment caught Mark's attention. It was from a man named Richard, who identified himself as a fellow business owner in the area. "Mark, I've dealt with this homeowner association before," Richard wrote. "They tried to pull the same stunt with my lot a few years ago. Don't back down, they rely on intimidation to get their way." Mark felt a surge of validation. He replied to Richard, asking for details about his experience. The two exchanged contact information, and within hours they were on the phone. "They're bullies," Richard explained. "They assume most people don't have the time or resources to fight back, so they push until they get what they want. When I refused to let them use my property, they tried to find me through some bogus community ordinance. It didn't hold up in court, but it was a hassle." Mark listened carefully, taking mental notes. Richard's advice was clear: stay firm, document everything, and don't let the homeowner association dictate the terms. Inspired by Richard's experience, Mark decided to prepare for the possibility of legal action, even if it was unlikely to go far. The next morning, Mark received another unwelcome surprise. As he arrived at the warehouse, he noticed small flyers taped to the walls and light posts around his property. The flyers bore the homeowner association's logo and contained a scathing message accusing him of endangering community harmony and refusing to collaborate. It urged residents to boycott his business and pressure him into compliance. Mark tore one of the flyers from the wall, anger flaring in his chest. This was no longer just about parking. This was a targeted smear campaign. He immediately called Karen and asked her to gather all the flyers around the property. Once he had them in hand, he took photos and emailed them to Jacobs. "Can they do this?" Mark asked when Jacobs called him back. "Legally? No," Jacobs replied. "This could be considered defamation, especially if it damages your business. We can send a cease and desist letter, but you'll need to document any financial losses caused by this." Mark felt a mix of frustration and determination. The homeowner association was clearly escalating the conflict, but he wasn't about to back down. He spent the rest of the day filing a formal complaint with the local government, outlining the homeowner association's actions and their impact on his business. He also contacted a public relations consultant to help him craft a statement for the media, anticipating that the story might gain attention beyond the community. By the end of the week, the tension had reached a boiling point. News of the dispute had spread throughout the neighborhood, dividing residents into two camps: those who supported Mark's stance and those who sided with the homeowner association. Mark knew he had to stay focused and keep his emotions in check. The battle wasn't over, but he was determined to see it through, no matter how long it took. As the days passed, the tension between Mark and the homeowner association reached a boiling point. The parking lot remained clear, a visible reminder of Mark's victory, but the fallout continued to ripple through the neighborhood. Mark, determined to protect his rights in business, doubled down on his efforts to ensure that the homeowner association wouldn't try to retaliate again. Meanwhile, the residents remained divided, some supporting Mark's stance, others still angry at the disruption caused by his decisive actions. Mark's lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, had been instrumental in drafting responses to the homeowner association's increasingly hostile letters. Each correspondence was filled with bluster and thinly veiled threats, but legally the homeowner association's position was untenable. They continued to demand that Mark collaborate with the community and reinstate the parking privileges, framing his refusal as an act of selfishness that undermined neighborhood unity. One afternoon, Mark received an unexpected call from a local journalist who had caught wind of the dispute. The journalist, Rachel, was investigating claims of overreach by several homeowner associations in the area and wanted to interview Mark about his experience. Initially hesitant, Mark realized that publicizing the situation could shine a light on the homeowner association's behavior and potentially deter them from further action. During the interview, Mark recounted the events calmly and factually. He explained how the homeowner association had overstepped its boundaries, the impact it had on his business, and the steps he had taken to resolve the matter legally. Rachel asked pointed questions about the residents' reactions and whether Mark felt any remorse for towing the cars. "I did what I had to do to protect my property and my business," Mark said firmly. "I gave the homeowner association every opportunity to resolve this amicably, but they chose to ignore me. My actions were legal and necessary. If anything, this situation highlights the dangers of unchecked homeowner association power." The article was published a week later, accompanied by photos of Mark's warehouse and the infamous parking lot. The headline read, "Homeowner Association Overreach Sparks Legal Battle Over Private Property Rights." The story quickly gained traction, with readers commenting on similar experiences with their own homeowner associations. Some criticized Mark, but the overwhelming majority supported him, calling the homeowner association's actions an abuse of power. The publicity put additional pressure on the homeowner association. Miss Langston, who had previously dismissed Mark's warnings, now found herself under scrutiny, not only from the community but also from local officials who had been alerted to the situation. The homeowner association's tactics were being questioned, and their reputation was taking a significant hit. In the midst of the fallout, Mark received an invitation to attend the next homeowner association board meeting. At first, he was reluctant, suspecting it might be another attempt to strong-arm him into compliance. But Jacobs advised him to attend, viewing it as an opportunity to assert his position publicly and on the record. The meeting was held in the community center, and Mark arrived early, determined to stay composed no matter what unfolded. The room quickly filled with residents, many of whom were visibly agitated. Miss Langston sat at the head of the table, flanked by other board members who looked equally tense. After the usual procedural matters, the floor was opened to discuss the parking dispute. Miss Langston began with a statement, framing the homeowner association's actions as an attempt to address a pressing community issue. She painted Mark as uncooperative and unwilling to compromise, a characterization that drew murmurs from the audience. When it was his turn to speak, Mark rose from his seat and addressed the room. His voice was steady, his words measured. He explained the timeline of events, the steps he had taken to communicate with the homeowner association, and the legal rights he had exercised in towing the cars. "This was never about being uncooperative," Mark said, meeting the eyes of several residents. "This was about standing up for my property and my business. The homeowner association acted without my consent, misled residents into thinking they had a right to park on private property, and ignored my repeated attempts to resolve the issue amicably. I'm not the villain here." The room fell silent for a moment before a few residents began clapping. Their support emboldened Mark, and he continued. I'm not against the community. I understand the parking issue is frustrating, but the solution isn't to trample over someone else's rights. There are better ways to address this, ways that respect everyone involved. The applause grew louder, and Miss Langston's expression hardened. She attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the momentum had shifted. Several residents began voicing their own frustrations with the homeowner association, accusing the board of acting without transparency and prioritizing their own interests over the community's. One resident, an older man named Mr. Davis, stood up and pointedly addressed the board. This isn't the first time the homeowner association has overstepped. It's time for some accountability. We need new leadership, people who actually listen to the residents. The meeting devolved into a heated debate, with calls for Miss Langston to step down. Mark stayed quiet, observing as the residents began to turn against the homeowner association. By the end of the night, it was clear that the parking dispute had exposed deeper issues within the community. A few days later, Mark received an email from one of the board members. It was a formal apology, acknowledging the homeowner association's mishandling of the situation and promising to revise their policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. Miss Langston, it turned out, had resigned from her position, and new elections were being planned. For Mark, the resolution was bittersweet. He had won the battle, but it had come at the cost of strained relationships with some of the residents. Still, he felt a sense of pride in standing his ground and forcing the homeowner association to confront its flaws. As he stood in the now empty parking lot of his warehouse, Mark reflected on the ordeal. The experience had been exhausting, but it had also taught him the importance of perseverance and the value of asserting one's rights. The lot, once a symbol of conflict, now felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that sometimes fighting back is the only way to ensure fairness and respect.